is on either early or late. But my pool is just perfect, and I don't know what happened. I mean, within 2 hours, pool was green. Right now. But I threw a bunch of chlorine in.
Clean it back up.
24 hours. Cleaned it right out.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It was just crazy. Barbara Carey and Alaska. I'm supposed to be watching. They want to say. It's down.
He doesn't see water where the grass is. Good job. That's right. No doubt.
Well, it is now 7 o'clock, so I will call the Whitley County Plan Commission meeting Wednesday, August 21st to order. And if everyone would please join me in honoring our country with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please. Travis Baker. Chad Banks.
Here.
Dane Drew. Here. Brent Emerick. Here. Jack Green.
Here.
Thor Hodges.
Here.
Mark Johnson.
Here.
Ken Kurtz-Seslar.
Here.
Joe Wolf.
Here.
John Woodmansee.
Here.
I would ask at this time, are there any changes or amendments or additions to the minutes as they were presented to you from last month's meeting? Hearing none, I would ask for a motion, please.
I'll make a motion. We approve. Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Any further discussion, please? Hearing none, we'll go to the roll call for a vote, please. Chad Banks.
Abstain.
Dane Drew.
Abstain.
Brent Emerick.
Aye.
Jack Green.
Aye.
Mark Johnson.
Aye.
Ken Kurtz-Seslar.
Aye.
Joe Wolf.
Aye.
Thor Hodges.
Yes.
Next part of our meeting, before we get into new business, is the administration of the oath to witnesses. If you plan on participating in the meeting tonight by speaking, we are just going to simply administer an oath to you that you promise to what you say is factual. So I will have Ms. Decker do that now, if you would, please.
You can stand and raise your right hand if you plan on speaking tonight. Do you swear or affirm that any statements you make before the commission tonight will be the truth? If so, state I do.
Thank you for that. We have nothing under old business, so we'll move forward to new business. And the one on our agenda tonight will be 24W Subdivision 14, titled Polley Acres Subdivision. Staff report, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. So going to the screen. This is a one-lot plat being named Polley Acres, located on Sheldon Road, about almost a half-mile north of Anderson Road in Smith Township. Currently zoned AG agricultural. What is proposed is one lot, as I said. The right-of-way is not dedicated with this plat because there was sufficient right-of-way already dedicated when Sheldon Road was constructed, so no additional is needed. The intention is for a new home site for one home. Platting is required due to previous splits. This is the first platted lot from the 2018 parcel. No zoning required. I do mention, though, in the staff report that this AG parcel, the overall parent parcel, is flanked by Lake Residential on the north and south sides. So at some point in the future, rezoning to a similar district may make sense. That, of course, is up to you and commissioners. But this is in an area that has been previously split for subdivisions to the north and south. So if that comes back, just a heads up. As you can see there in the table, everything meets the zoning code minimums. The lot width is measured at the building line. I believe it actually winds up being a little bit wider as you go farther back. So the outline parcel in blue is the parent tract. You can see that it does have some frontage there in Anderson Road. However, this proposed lot is off of Sheldon Road. As I mentioned, here's the zoning map. I usually don't show the zoning for plats, but just to give you a sense, overall, the darker green is AG agricultural, and the lighter bluish green is the LR residential. And as I said, there's a area to the north and south adjacent to this parent tract. Closer view of the area that is actually proposed to be platted. The proposed plat itself, a little bit of an L shape, and I believe the reason for this, or at least the depth, is to go back to the wood line and then take in the remaining acreage of the parent tract. And then the overall, the overlay over the aerial here. And the petitioner may give some indication as to where they plan on actually constructing the residence. Going through the different comments that had been received, very few comments. The county engineer did give some comment about driveway location. However, that's subject to final discretion of the highway department. The parcel committee did note that Polley Acres is kind of an unusual spelling with the EY in it. However, they also said that as a one lot plat, it really doesn't matter. It's not going to cause confusion for anybody. So that's just a minor point. And then that yields the proposed conditions, basically being our two relatively standard conditions. Number one being that there be 2 septic sites be approved by the health department before building permits being issued, and then delegation of secondary plat approval to staff. Any questions for me?
Thank you, Nathan. Is there someone here to speak on behalf of this request tonight for this project? If you would, come on up to the podium. If you speak tonight, if you would please, once you come up to the podium, just state your name and your address, and then the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Jen Hauser. My current address is 5864 East 500 North in Charleston. I'm with my fiance, Trevor. And just to note, Polley is his last name. So it is unusual to spell the first name Polley, but that does happen to be his last name. So we are purchasing this 3.55 acres from Martin Schmucker, who's been a landowner, I believe, since 2015. Our house will sit 100 feet off of the road, 50 feet from the south of the property line, is about proximity of where the driveway then would go. I don't know what else I should share or any questions that come for me.
It's pretty basic. We're just kind of want to get your perspective, and as Nathan said, give us an idea of what your plan was or is.
Okay, sure. So it'll be a approximately 2,200 square feet on a 1-story on a basement. So
Appreciate that. Are there any questions from the commission, please? Thank you so much.
thank you.
Now I will open up public hearing, and anybody that's here in the audience that would like to speak in favor or in opposition to this request, now would be your time to come forward and voice your opinions, please. Last call. And I see no one moving forward, so I will go ahead and close the public hearing portion, and I will turn it back to the commission for their decision, please.
I move to approve 24 West Subdivision 14.
I'd second that.
with the staff
With
recommendations.
staff recommendations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion, please? Hearing none, we'll go to the roll call for vote, please.
Chad Banks,
Yes.
Dane Drew,
Yes.
Brent Emerick,
Yes.
Jack Green,
Yes.
Mark Johnson,
Yes.
Kurtz-Seslar,
Yes.
Joe Wolf,
Yes.
and Thor Hodges.
Yes. And it is approved. Congratulations. You guys are more than welcome to duck out, or you can stay for the rest of our meeting, which could be very interesting. So it's entirely up to you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, I saw some green.
Yeah.
Used to be a lot of green, now it's Solomon's, a lot of it. So,
All right, moving forward then to other business, we're going to have some discussion tonight on the, some of the preliminary things that we have discussed and put together on the shooting range, and some zoning issues with farm and agricultural businesses also. I don't know if everyone's had a chance to read through the draft that you've got, but I think I'm just going to turn it over to Nathan at this point, and he can walk us through what he's put together here. And this is not only a draft, but I would consider it a rough draft, and we're looking for input here. So things that strike you as not making sense, or you're seeing a void where you think there should be more verbiage, do a little bit of research, offer it now, or contact Nathan tomorrow, and let's make sure that we hone this before we pass it through, because this is something that could affect a lot of our neighbors in the enjoyment and the safety of their property here in Whitley County. So Nathan, I'll turn it over to you, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think that was a really good summary of what we're doing with this tonight. To kind of cover where we're going first, depending on how we discuss stuff tonight and what you feel comfortable with, we may be advertising for a public hearing for a more final draft and public input next month. Or at October. I'm kind of thinking probably more October, but we'll see how the discussion goes tonight. Either one was still within the original expectation of a 2, 3, 4 months turnaround time.
And if I could interject, I think it would be fair at this point for you to share with anybody on the commission what the BZA ruled on the operation of the current range that's there. If you would share that with everyone, if everyone's not aware, because I think that plays into why you're looking at that time frame too. May have very well have something to do with it.
It's similar reasons, yes. So the BZA took the request from the Plan Commission regarding the enforcement, basically the request to cease and desist for the operation of the range up on 400 North, and basically said they would hold off on pushing for enforcement. So filing suit, for example, for basically 90 days, not basically, for 90 days. Which basically does allow them to finish out their already planned season. Not really their intention, but it was a coincidental thing. They gave them 90 days otherwise. So after which then they would either be in violation if they continue to operate, and we would wind up giving them violation notices and so on, or if they do finish out the season, they couldn't reopen until and unless we have a code in place for them to have a path of compliance. So this is an important thing to get rolling because of that, as the president said, and the timing right there in about 90 days or so is ideal. So any questions? Did I leave anything out, BZA members, from what you want to mention? Okay. Anything else I should mention, Thor? that you want to highlight, or just go into?
No, I think if that's your statement and you're comfortable with leaving it at that, then I'm going to defer to you. So you can move forward if you like.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see. So going to what is, the president's very much right. This is a very rough draft here with a lot of things that are kind of options, things for discussion points. The ad hoc committee met of Thor and Chad and Kim and I and Brent met twice here in the past month to go over what are we trying to achieve, high level stuff, and then kind of narrowed that down, funneled that down some. So Thor, you had a really good statement last time we met, last time the committee met, about what the goal for the shooting range was, and I'm butchering what you said in what I wrote here, but so feel free to correct me on this, but what I have written out there is provide minimum necessary regulations to establish safe shooting ranges, both indoor and outdoor, while permitting hunting and private shooting, so on private property. Emphasis on safe, which also means protection of the enjoyment of surrounding properties. So then the objectives below that would be determination of location, what would be permitted uses versus special exception uses and in what zoning district, and then creation of some minimum development standards. Important to note, in Indiana at least, very few places that we could find have any mention of shooting ranges in their zoning code. And if they do, primarily either permitted use, special exception, or it's mentioned in the parking code. Actually, quite a few of them were mentioned in parking codes. None that we could find actually had development standards in the zoning code. And so that's something that we'll defer to legal counsel on, is why is that? But we did find that Lake County has a fairly extensive set of development standards in their general code, in their general regulations. So that's one question, is this to be handled only in zoning, or would it be partially zoning, partially general code? I believe the Planning Commission can act on general recommendations, even if it's not a zoning code thing. And the commissioners can always ask for opinion on non-zoning matters if they wish. So where this lands is probably a legal question, but I think it's still fair game for the Planning Commission to get thought to, even if it doesn't wind up in the zoning code. Then also, are we looking at more specific standards, specifically stated explicit standards, stated in the code, or would they be outside reference to the NRA guidelines, for example, or other resources? And there's pros and cons to doing it either way. And then finally, if you do have specific standards, how prescriptive are they versus how adaptive are they? Meaning, it's a 50-foot setback, point blank, that's what you have to meet, or is it a setback that's somewhat variable depending on the height of the berm or other factors? Or just say, BZA, this is important for you to consider, but it's a very site-dependent consideration. So that's what I mean by adaptive, is it adapts to the site. So those are kind of the objectives, and this rep draft kind of does take a shot at answering those various pieces. So going into, I'm just kind of going to go point by point here. The definitions we looked at, we as staff and the committee looked at several different reference codes for definitions, some zoning, some general codes, some Indiana, some outside the state. And so what I put into this draft is kind of a, what the committee kind of felt was the best option. So indoor ranges would be completely enclosed facilities, used for the discharging of firearms for the purpose of target practice or temporary competition. That does exclude government facilities and gunsmithing operations, which would be considered accessory uses. So if you had a shooting range at the jail, for example, that would be part of the jail itself. It wouldn't warrant a separate special exception, or if you had a government facility in a residential area and they had a shooting range as part of that facility, it wouldn't necessarily, as an indoor range, it wouldn't necessarily trigger the need for rezoning or other work. Same thing with gunsmithing operations, which we frequently allow for home occupations. It's definitely such an indoor range would be an accessory use to that. So it's provision to allow for those operations without additional approvals needed. Outdoor ranges, I have two options here noted in the yellow. Option one is a little bit more basic. If outdoor ranges are for shooting firearms outside, excluding hunting and private shooting on a non-recurring basis, unorganized, non-recurring, basically meaning that it is a homeowner who gets some friends together a couple times a month, maybe, not really organized. It's not, we're meeting at this hour and so on. It's just, come over and we'll do some target practice. That could work really well. However, being that non-recurring and unorganized are kind of open-ended terms, that leads to option two, which more explicitly states a way to say, okay, we're going to limit this to, as it's suggested here, 6 times per month. Anything more than that, you fall into a regulated situation of an outdoor range, and you would be treated as essentially a commercial range at that point. So that's one thing. Anybody have feelings on either of those options, committee members, if you want to chime in with some feedback on that?
The non-reoccurring discharge of firearms. I can go outside every Sunday and hear people. But the other thing is the pleasure and enjoyment of people's personal property, which being around the county most all the time on certain roads, I'll see, berms anywhere from 5 feet to 10 feet. Sometimes it's just a dirt burn. Other times they'll be back with railroad ties. Sometimes it's a different material. So how much are we going to open it up for those private citizens? Yeah, their pleasure and their enjoyment is shooting every weekend.
Other thoughts on that?
Well, I think, Joe, that's why we'd want to stick with maybe that first option and not option two, where we get more into the weeds about what people can do on their own property and on their own time.
I'm just looking at it from a legalistic view, and somebody's going to say it's reoccurring and it's happening every week. So
Yeah.
I don't want us to, somebody's going to try to paint us in a corner one way or the other.
I'll bring up something else that I hadn't thought of until right now is 4-H has a shooting sports program in which we have to have an approved range. We have volunteers that are approved. We have safety, but it may not, I don't know, it may not adhere to some of these codes as they're written. And, that's been a program that's operated safely for years and years. So I may need to get some information to you on that. I don't know.
Yeah, if you could, we can kind of meld around that. We looked at Camp Whitley as one of those kind of oddball, not oddball, but not a commercial range.
Yeah, it's not a commercial thing.
Institutional, is that what you call it? Using 4-H and say conservation camp and.
Could be, yeah.
So.
I really can't help but think that this was maybe purposely not addressed when that last code revamp overhaul was done, because there weren't any issues on the table at that point. And they wanted the people who were on the commission and in charge of that, it was a subcommittee at that time, they wanted this discussion in reference to someone coming in and wanting to do this. I can't help but think I don't believe this was accidentally overlooked. I don't know, I wasn't on, none of us were, I don't believe.
Right.
And with that being said, I guess I want to state publicly that I'm disappointed in how BZA and even your office, Nathan, has handled this as far as just allowing it to continue for 3 months outside of any regulations, outside of any zoning, outside of any proper channels. It's not just someone going out and shooting on their property for their enjoyment of their property and the betterment of themselves to be proficient with firearms. This is a commercial range that we're talking about here. So I'm not going to hijack the meeting, but I'm going to throw that in there as a thinking point, that I'm not so sure that this wasn't purposely overlooked until it got to the point to where there were more details on what exactly someone wanted to come and do. And that might be exactly why it wasn't put in anywhere.
Yep. And I wasn't here then either, and I could definitely see that. There are other times that's exactly what happens. You leave something out of a code, or you leave it kind of open-ended and just say that's the future planning commission's thing to deal with. Well, now you're the future planning
especially
commission.
since it was in code before that.
Right. Yep. Yeah, it could have been omitted accidentally. It could have been an intentional thing. Either way, we're here.
So we had gun ranges in our code prior to.
What year
In the
was,
past.
yeah, before that last code overhaul in 12, when was it?
2006.
2006.
Yep.
And that's what the range on Hauser Road was approved underneath that code that was in place at that time. With, I think, some agreements with neighbors and other property owners to
Yeah.
fine tune hours of operation.
And I believe, for reference, we gave you a couple different things. We didn't give you all the different reference codes that we've looked at, but we did give you a copy of the 2006 BZA approval for that Hauser Road range because it's a local code, because it's a local approval. So that could be used as kind of a baseline. I'm saying kind of a lot, but that could be used as a baseline for discussion if you wish.
And Thor, no disrespect, but I'm not sure how we can expect this office to enforce anything when there's no rules that exist. I'm not sure how we would expect the BZA to ask them to cease and desist and enforce a rule that is non-existent at this time. It's not in the zone code.
I don't think that the common sense here to me would be that the common sense to me here would be, Chad, that they're operating a range in an unsafe manner for surrounding property owners. That's first and foremost is my concern, especially with all the citizens that we had in here that had concerns over that they're not doing it in a safe, they're not operating in a safe manner. If they were operating in a safe manner, I'm right there with you. I agree.
And and I know you have experience with ranges. I have limited experience with ranges, but I do have experience with ranges. And I think if we went around and asked folks, I'm not sure that you'd find I'm not sure that you'd find a balanced response on whether or not this is a safe range. I think maybe we can look at it and say, well, we feel maybe this is unsafe. And you may have other experts in the field who say, we feel this is safe. So I don't know, I think it's really healthy that we're having the discussion, but I'm not sure that we're experts in the field that can deem this safe or unsafe.
I would agree that we're probably not expert enough to put in all of the qualifications that maybe are necessary to say, hey, this is safe, go have fun. But I think we are smart enough to realize when something's being done unsafely. And I recognize that with this particular case. My opinion is I recognize that in this particular instance, and that's, I guess, what bothers me about it. Not that they're doing anything unsafe, but there are just too many chances for it to be unsafe with the range that they've got now. You know, a 1.5 sided range or a 1-sided range with a partial berm on another side, to me, that's huge. So that's where I draw that from. I respect your opinion and your comments on it, and I agree that I don't know all the rules that should be in place on it. That's the reason that we're having these discussions. But I do also think I can recognize when something is just not right.
Yeah, and to that point, and it was during our most recent committee meeting when we learned about these conditions that were placed on the Hauser Road range when it was approved in 2006. And I had asked Nathan, and I'm grateful that he did bring this because I thought it was important for the Planning Commission to see that this is once what was approved in Whitley County. And you know, a lot of those names that I've seen that were on both Planning Commission and even Sergeant Rob Townsend from the state police, who was involved in this process. I know them well enough and they put a lot of work into this. And so just as a point of reference for what has been approved in the past, this is a great resource to look at next, I think.
And it's probably worth noting too, the Hauser Road range took 2 tries to get approved. It was approved in 2006, but the first time it was proposed was in 1996. You guys remember? In the mid-90s. And that one was denied. And then they came back about 10 years later, so.
You may have addressed this before, Nathan, but was the Hauser range operational before they had approval?
No.
Okay, no, I wasn't sure if they were just doing a flat shooting area, so okay, no, it wasn't.
Thank you.
Other thoughts on, from Joe's comments and Chad and Thor, your comments, I think we need to maybe tweak a little bit of the language here to make sure that private ranges are a bit more explicitly protected than what's written, and that's not unexpected. And definitely option 1 is probably more preferential than option 2. So I'll make those notes, and John, if you could give me more details on how the 4-H program works and where it's located and what they do, that'll be quite helpful.
We're gonna be next week. What should be that?
That's fine.
Is the sorry, I just have a question to make sure that I understand. So like with South Whitley, or not South Whitley, I'm sorry, is 4-H, is it an annual thing that happens, but it's only during a certain period of time?
Yeah, they have shoots, I don't know, 2 or 3 times prior to the fair, and there's nothing at the fair. It's all completed before they get there. But it's all, you know, the shooting range layout has to be approved by the Purdue Risk Management, and there's a number of volunteers that have to be there. They follow strict rules.
Where do they do it at? You know,
That I don't know.
I was just curious because if it's more of a temporary nature instead of a permanent commercial, that might be something we address in the ordinance as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it's at Camp Whitley or someplace else. I can't remember.
Have we looked at other counties like Noble and DeKalb, and how they have it zoned?
We did, and I'll just bring this up. As I alluded to, no counties in Indiana that we've defined actually have any development standards. But here's a little table. Let's see if I can zoom in for you. Let's see if I can zoom in more. So the, whoops. I'll get that back in a second, sorry. So Huntington County does address it, but only in the parking code. Kosciuszko doesn't address shooting ranges whatsoever. Noble County does address it. They are permitted in their high intensity district. So basically equivalent to our IN district. Wabash County does address them. They are special exception uses in their A2, so their higher intensity agricultural district, and FRC, which I believe is a conservation, recreation conservation district. Allen, similar, is allowed by special exception only in A1, C2, and C4. And then they actually do have standards, not standards, but locations for indoor ranges as well specified. Steuben, similar special exception in their agricultural and EC, which I don't remember what EC is, but
I don't remember either.
I believe it's a commercial district. Wells does not, DeKalb does not. LaGrange, similar special exception in A1. And Hancock, we started to look at ones farther south. Hancock does have a special exception for open ranges in their agricultural. RR and CR. RR is, I believe, rural residential, very similar to ours. And CR, I believe, is conservation residential. And Johnson does not. Monroe. We pulled Monroe specifically because we thought with the woods area, with the state forest and stuff there, they might, and they actually do have something, but they only allow for indoor ranges. They don't have anything mentioned about outdoor ranges. And as I said, none of them that we could find in the state of Indiana had actual development standards beyond permitted or a special exception in their zoning codes.
I would also add, I didn't look at general ordinances to know if there was something in the county ordinance itself, but in zoning, those were the results.
My guess is with a special exception, the benefit would be you can tailor it more to the specific parcel, right?
Right.
As opposed to just having development standards that apply across the board.
It triggers the need for the public hearing.
Okay.
Yep. But again, they don't have any, even with special exception, they don't give any sort of framework to BZA to say, this is what's important. And I think with what we're headed towards, that's what we're going to give the BZA. If it's in the zoning code, that's what we'd give the BZA, a framework of, look at this. Here's minimum standards perhaps, or at least look at this and give this consideration.
And if it's decided that it's not in the zoning code and it ends up in a general code somewhere, then who's the appropriate body to make the decision?
So assuming that it's a special exception that's needed for location, as part of that special exception review, the BZA still could refer back to the general code and say, meet the requirements of the general code. That's, again, why I'm kind of deferring to legal counsel to figure out why it's sometimes in general code. Maybe there's some good reason that it applies more broadly. I don't know.
Has DNR had any input on shooting ranges, or they totally out of it? I guess what I'm asking is if and when this all gets settled, is there going to be an inspection process handled by the police or DNR? Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here, but I don't know, DNR, I don't know if it'd pay to have any conversation with them and get their thoughts.
I don't think they do any regulation of shooting ranges.
Okay.
I know they have a grant program because they've recently distributed that information where individuals who want to open a shooting range can apply for grants. And I'm sure as part of the grant, there's certain safety procedures that have to be met. But my guess that's done on a case by case basis because each parcel location is going to be different. But to my knowledge, that's the extent of DNR's involvement in shooting ranges.
Yeah. We did research as best as we could to see if DNR had guidelines for shooting ranges, and They do not. They have some really broad statements about what's required, but they don't have the level that we were looking for.
And I did review the grant application, just and the documentation with it, just to see if there was something in there that might be helpful in there. It was really vague.
And the DNR operates a shooting range in Huntington, or just south of Huntington, on the Salamone property that's open to the public.
Yeah, and Brent, if you want, we've got various snippets of aerial views of quite a few different ranges around Whitley County, in Huntington, elsewhere. There's a wide variety of placement, what's around them, and so on. So it's hard to make consistent judgment based upon what's existing. So we need to look at more standards and say, try and figure out what is a best practice and what is best practice, be safe, respectful of neighbors, and so on. Okay, any other thoughts on the definitions? I think.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, under the options you've got under the code revision, so the shooting range that's up in question, they said it was private, but they were having people that paid large amounts of money. So technically, with that, I guess, is that a commercial? Like, I guess, what are we saying is the difference between commercial and private? Because to me, a private range is if you and your family go out and shoot versus, you know, if you're getting paid money, to me, that seems more commercial.
So the way this option 1 is written, and again, I picked this one out of several different reference codes as a model, and I tweaked it some based on our discussion with the committee. This avoids using monetary factors as a distinction, because a nonprofit could say, hey, we don't receive money. We have 200 people here every weekend, but we don't get money. Therefore, we're not for profit. We're non-commercial. We want to avoid that. So the way this would work is basically, if you're unorganized and non-recurring, and I know we need to tweak that language, on private property, so just random shooting times, Monday, Friday, 1 week, and Saturdays, even every Saturday, I guess that's the issue that we have to tweak. If it's not an organized sort of situation, that wouldn't be treated as quote unquote commercial. But in the case of the range that's at question, it is definitely organized. They have people coming in at a specific time for a specific reason. They have instructors. It's very much an organized situation, and on a schedule.
So are you saying that that's falling in option 2? Because to me, that doesn't fall in option 2 either.
It would be,
because if they're paying money, so option 2 says a membership where no fee is charged or a membership is required. So I guess I feel like if people are paying, it doesn't really fall in option 2 either. So to me, that just leaves indoor for commercial, I guess, is the way I'm looking at it.
What about the Isaac Walton League kind of ranges too?
those would be treated as, if you're looking at the language of option 2, that's the membership one saying, if you are, even if you are a membership only, even if you don't charge for it, if you shoot more than 6 times a month, then you would be regulated as an actual range. What I'm hearing is this needs to be clarified in order to address things, so.
And so when we had the hearings the last time, I think there was a lot of splitting hairs over things. When the range owners were coming in to testify, I know people aren't specifically paying them to come in and shoot, but that is part of the package of what they're paying for, right? Like they're taking the classes, part of that package includes, I think by any definition, I mean, common sense, that's commercial. But I do think we need to probably parse out a little bit better, and I can work with you on the language about private use of land. Like, the landowner shooting in his woods versus, or hunting on his land versus, because they're not always having people there either at the gun range, but it is a commercial purpose. You wouldn't be operating a business. It's done under the cover of the LLC and people are paying to come there.
So,
His is done under the cover of an LLC.
Where there's an LLC that operates the,
Yeah, or maybe it's even incorporated. But Yeah.
I must have missed that in the hearing.
Yeah, it's condition red response or
yeah.
whatever the name is.
And for Chad, that's something, I don't think you were here in July.
No.
That's something I brought up in July, is that they're running a commercial business on AG property. So when you tell me, oh, it's all good, well, I don't think so, because they don't even have permission to do that, do they? I mean, that's my question. I mean, you know, I think Thor's, you know, passionate about this and pretty aggressive on the enforcement idea, but I mean, I can't go out and run a commercial business on AG with doing nothing, can I? So, okay. It's just one point, I guess, that maybe got missed in all this.
Yeah.
And we rarely have situations like this that go to the staff and DZA, and it's complicated by the commissioner's request to do what we're doing, so change the code to address it. So yeah, that's why we took it to DZA and said in this case, how do you want to handle it? Is it an immediate request to shut down, or is it let us address things based upon the commissioner's request? So.
I don't know if I was sleeping during that hearing, but I don't remember talking about an LLC or being incorporated. But I do remember them talking about their attorney who said there was nothing regulating them. So, you know, essentially go ahead, and you guys weren't even approached.
Right.
Well, the thing that I think, like Brent just said, the thing that regulated them was the fact that the land wasn't zoned for them to have a business.
Yeah. And I think, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think that's a good segue into the next slide, which is the proposed locations. Or if we're going to allow these, and this is still an if, I don't think there's any obligation for us to say that outdoor ranges have to be allowed somewhere. You could always make it a special exception under only the intensive use district. But indoor ranges, let's look at those. What I'm suggesting, indoor ranges be permitted uses under the Parks and Recs district, general commercial and IPM industrial park manufacturing. Being completely enclosed, those commercial and industrial districts are completely enclosed. Effectively, they would be very similar to other completely enclosed operations. And then allowing for special exception for indoor ranges in the AG district, and then BC Village commercial. So hypothetically, if you had a small gallery range that wanted to locate in Etna or Kwesi, I think might have some BC, that might be warranted with a special exception in that additional oversight. Other options, we could look at the other industrial district being IN, AGP, and then we've got other residential districts, which I assume you guys don't want even indoor ranges in residential districts. But on the indoor ranges, is that the right thinking? Any thoughts on those? How that's laid out? Okay, not hearing anything at the moment, and you can give me feedback later, that's fine. Going on to outdoor ranges, similar to what we saw in the table of surrounding counties, not treating it as a permitted use anywhere, but allowing it as special exception in AG, the Parks and Recs district, and in IN, so the heavy industrial district.
Parks and Rec, I think that kind of lines up with our previous discussion, and AG. And AGP is another question. Is it appropriate perhaps an AGP? So thoughts on that? Thor, I think you had mentioned at one of the committee meetings you weren't really comfortable allowing even a special exception in AG. Do you still kind of think that, or?
A special exception in AG, I don't have an issue with that.
Okay. Okay, so if you've got more thoughts, or if you think of some situation that hypothetically it could go into lake residential and you want to explain it, let me know. So we'll kind of chalk this up as tentatively go forward with this layout. So going to more specific standards, which again could be in the zoning ordinance or in the general code as we wind up. As I've written out here, indoor ranges would be relatively, have fairly few standards for them. Basically two, one, that the range be enclosed and have quote unquote impenetrable walls and ceilings and floors, or baffles to prevent projectiles from hitting the walls and ceilings and therefore going through the walls and ceilings. And that standard actually came from, again, one of the references. And as did the second piece, that indoor shooting ranges would be constructed and insulated for noise mitigation. So those are the standards for indoor ranges. If you feel like there needs to be more thought to that, is there anything that you feel would be perhaps more important to add into an indoor range for consideration?
Is there any code then at a state level that would tell you what the dB limits would be, or give you more specifics from a design standpoint?
Quite the opposite. The state code, thank you for bringing that up. The state code I forget the citation, states that shooting ranges, so it just says shooting ranges, can be regulated by local ordinance, except for legally established shooting ranges are not subject to noise complaints. So if they meet the requirements of the standards of the code in terms of noise and everything else, if they have quote unquote noise issues, basically it can't be enforced then, unless they're in excess of whatever we have in the code. So no, there's nothing that's kind of tilted to the opposite side. The general performance standards of section 5.7 state objectionable noise. So it's kind of a subjective standard. Well, moving on for the moment, again, I'm leaning towards you guys giving me feedback and to the committee feedback, and we'll, at this point, probably bring a second draft for next month. So moving on to the next set of standards as the ref draft has it, which are for outdoor ranges, and these are much more extensive. These are largely taken from the Lake County standards. However, Lake County does have a lot of overlap with other locations. Like some consistency, but in language, but everybody has slightly different interpretations. So the basics are that a berm or backstop would be required. The material, height, thickness, dimensions of that berm and backstop, including whether it be three-sided, four-sided, whatever it would be as recommended in the NRA guideline, or excuse me, NRA's guide to planning and construction of ranges. And that is, again, my mentality there is to use that as an outside reference rather than stating it specifically in the code. Because the guidelines should address multiple situations. However, Thor, you were definitely thinking a set standard for 3 or 4-sided.
I think that we should have a standard of at least a 3-sided range in our outline, in our code.
Yeah. So much more prescriptive standard explicitly stating that.
And I think, not to get off ahead of myself here, but I've read ahead, I don't see anything about the baffling system for an outdoor range identified in here either. And I think that's an integral part of what our expectation
Yes.
should be, because the bullets that you have control of that you're shooting into the berm aren't the ones you're gonna have to worry about. It's that one that gets away that goes over the top of the berm because it's an accidental discharge that the baffling system is gonna collect. And the baffling system is gonna reduce the noise to the neighbors. So that definitely should be part of our plan.
Yeah. Thank you. That was an oversight on my part. I was focused on the berms and backstops and how to word that. That should be right there, slotted in as well.
Are the 20-foot high smoke berms that they talked about in the prior case, is that tall enough?
I think so. I mean,
I don't remember what they were using out there, but they were 20 feet.
They're close to it, aren't it, isn't it? Well, not code red. Code red, I think they're only what?
I thought he told us
12.
12. Well,
Yeah.
12.
if you're on the 75-yard range and in with the height of your baffling system and a 20-foot berm, you're not seeing sky.
Yeah.
There's no opportunity for a bullet to have a clean path to get out of there. Now, as you get up closer, if you're on a 3-yard line where you're right underneath the baffling system, then you're gonna be seeing blue, you're gonna be seeing sky. But most of those bullets that are gonna get away probably aren't ever gonna come from the 3 to 5 yard range. If at all, they shouldn't. I mean, that's a gross mistake if it does.
Yeah, and that's a good point to make too. I think in terms of public safety, we would be looking at the accidental discharges and you can't account for someone who maliciously or intentionally does something like shoot straight up or something like that. Unless you're in an enclosed range, we can't account for that very easily. So
And there's also, I mean, it's not just zoning, there also are sometimes criminal penalties for individuals who shoot in a way that's unsafe. Criminal recklessness is one. So I mean, there's other ways to deal with that aspect as well.
yeah. So add baffling, give me some feedback on thoughts of using a prescriptive 3-sided backstop and berm versus relying on an NRA guide, which is flexible. They call for a single backstop, and then the sides are kind of optional depending on the length of the range and other factors. So going on, general statement that the owner must maintain the berm and backstop in good condition. That's in there as a statement, so that what is, basically if you don't maintain it, it becomes a zoning violation. Same thing for dangerous projectiles must not leave the property. That's kind of goes without saying, but if there's a recurrent problem with overshooting or anything else, that could be used as grounds for rescinding the approval for the entire range. So that's why that's in there. That's not really a, hey, you had people shooting where they're not supposed to sort of thing, and a criminal prosecution. That would be what Liz just mentioned. But this is much more of a, you just don't control where your shooters are shooting. You're not a safe range anymore. we're going to take you through and potentially rescind your approval. Going to the setbacks, then that's the next major standard, I guess. I'm put in 50 feet from any property line. Where that comes from is it equals the IN district, which requires 50 feet. The AG district requires 25 feet for primary structures. This would be measured from any part of the range itself, not including like parking, or if you have like a restroom facility or something like that, that would be a different thing, but it would be the firing line, the overall width of the range, and then back to the backstop. So that's, again, I used an existing district, being the IN district there. 300 feet, the one highlighted in yellow, 300 feet from any residence is a very common standard. 300 feet from any residential property line is a less common standard, but there was another reference to that. And then they actually had in that one, they had another distance, I believe it was 1,000 feet from the residence itself. So this is, I'm kind of putting out there, we've had this discussion before. Does it make sense to measure to the property line versus to a structure? So this is another instance, and it is 300 feet. 300 feet, even though it's a common reference point, is that excessive, is it not? So I'm putting that out there for feedback. And then 300 feet from a public road right of way, that again is a common standard for the ones that have public road right of ways set that. But again, it's kind of an arbitrary thing. The downrange berm placement, that is actually copied from the Lake County standards, and I kind of that will be trimmed down because it's a lot of legalese. Basically means that when you have one of those items downrange, even beyond 300 feet, you still have to place the berm in a way that will always capture any sort of projectiles going that way. So thoughts, comments on any of those setback pieces? Actually, before you give me comments, I forgot I have another slide, a couple slides here. So for the last committee meeting, I put together a set of concentric circles for the 2 ranges, and actually for this meeting, I did the 3rd range that we have in the county. So let me zoom in here so it's a little easier to see what those numbers are. So this is Highlight Road. This is the approved location from 2006. The circles are approximately centered at the center of the range, probably a little closer to the actual targets. So you can see there, 300 feet is that innermost circle. If 300 feet were to be adopted as a setback to any residential property line, this would actually be compliant from that standard. However, if you use 50 feet from just as a general setback, it would be non-compliant because those berms go within about 10 feet, if not even closer. Actually, I think on the south side, it may even cross the property line. So it would be non-compliant from that aspect. And then I show 500, 750, 1,000, 1,500, and so on, just to give you some perspective. 2,500, I believe, was mentioned somewhere as being the furthest that a normal bullet that you'd be seeing at any of these ranges would probably travel and still be dangerous. And this is not me speaking as a shooter, so so about a half mile out or so, and beyond that, it's less likely to be a quote unquote dangerous projectile. So those who are shooters, am I thinking the right way, or should that be a bigger or smaller distance?
Well, I think it's unrealistic to expect that wide of a circle. I mean, I appreciate you putting all those numbers on there, but I don't know if that's realistic any place in Whitley County.
Okay.
To have that as a standard.
Right. So it's for reference. So the other thing with the Hyler Road, since I've got the aerial here, you'll notice on the 1,000-foot circle to the northwest of where it crosses Hyler Road, that is the nearest residence, is right there. The next nearest is off of 700 East, also just over 1,000 feet away, but not in the direction they're shooting. As you noted in those conditions, it's obligated to shoot north. And for some reason, the original proposal was to shoot south into the sun. But in the BZA approval, it was dictated that it would be shooting north. So not sure exactly what that thinking was. Perhaps they wanted to shoot away from the nearest residence. I'm not totally sure. The next slide here is similar. This is based upon the proposed range. And so you can see, let me scoot out here. If we use the 300 feet for residential properties, there are no residences within 300 feet of the range, and residential properties, in this case, actually wouldn't be either. The property to the west is a field, the property to the east is a field, and to the north, actually to the north, you do have a residential property, even though it's woods back there in the back, there is a residence on it. So that would be the nearest, that would be a residential property, but the location of this would be less than 300 feet from that. However, the 50-foot setback, as I suggest, would not be met. Their western berm is probably about 20 feet or so from the west property line. And you can see where the actual residences themselves lie. The nearest one would be approximately 1,000 feet to the south and southeast, and going on out from there.
You said there is a residence in the woods?
Not in the woods, it's up by the lake up here.
Oh.
So because that residence is on the entire property, that entire property would be quote unquote a residential property. Whereas these are split off from their residences. Going to the third one, as I mentioned, this was not prepared for the committee, but we did this, was kind of discussed, and we discussed it internally a little bit more. The Fish and Game Club, Conservation Club? Yeah, Conservation Club up in Busco is our other large established range. And so this is the same thing applied to them. And their range, they shoot, I believe, southeast, as you can see there. And important to note, the properties to the south are actually a commercial subdivision. It's Churubusco Business Park. The property to the north, the wooded area, is owned by the Conservation Club, and the property to the east is a non-residential ag property in Allen County with woods there that they would be shooting into. They don't own that, it's owned by somebody else, but there is no house on it. So again, this would meet that 300-foot requirement for non-resident, for residential property lines. But again, it probably would not meet the requirement for 50 feet as you look here. And I included topography on this because this is again, a range that's established that we knew how big the berms were at Hyler Road. We knew what they were proposed to be at 400 North. This is what they are here. Basically, you're looking at the blue contour line here at an 860 contour, and the maximum it goes up to is 874. So that's approximately 14 feet, partially enclosed. And then they have a second area here. This is about a 2-foot berm or so. So I'm not sure whether that's archery or what that is, but that is another range. They have since, this is actually from 2022, they've since expanded this. So this is actually about twice as wide. And they've moved this berm here to be up here. This is 3-sided, as you can see. but these side berms are only about 6 or 8 feet tall. And they're shooting into Allen County if they overshoot.
The white structure, the overhang, that's over the backstop.
That is, yes.
Is that some sort of baffling structure?
It would not be baffling in terms of what we're discussing, I don't think. I think that would be, it would be considered that if you were up close to it shooting, but if you were farther back where those white squares are, which are shooting positions as well, I don't think that would capture an errant bullet from that far back. You'd need farther baffling farther back. Thor, am I on the right track on that description?
From my experience up there, I would say yes.
Okay.
I think that partial structure was built for a couple different reasons. I think it was to protect the main backstop from deterioration from weather, and I also think that it was built that way. So they do have, I think at one time, I know they had cables and different things going across that structure on the inside to put targets and stuff on.
Okay.
But I haven't been up there in years, so I don't even know what kind of shapes it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, since they have put in some additional work in just the past couple of years, made this quite a bit bigger. It is in the Cherubusco zoning jurisdiction, by the way, so it's not a concern for you guys. Okay, so with those references in mind, going back to the setbacks, again, give me some feedback. As I said, the 50-foot, any sort of setback for the Highland Road location may be more and make it legal non-conforming. But again, is it 300 feet from a residence, 300 feet from a residential property line? Other things in play, schools, and so on, while those are mentioned in downrange, are those other things we want to call out specifically? How prescriptive do we want to get to this? How much do you want to give to the BZA, which yields then the final additional details that are in the code to be required, but are left open-ended. So any special exception approval, the BZA would be expected to explicitly state what the hours of operation are, whether that be dawn to dusk or 9 to 9, 9 a.m. to dusk, however they want to do it, whatever would be appropriate for the location. Security, as we heard with the case at hand, unauthorized persons going onto the range at odd hours was a concern. Seems like that's probably an important thing. The Highland Road location has no trespassing signs up. I think at one point they do have a chain across the access point with another no trespassing sign. So is that sufficient there versus another location? Again, very site specific. Fencing may be appropriate in some instances and not in others. Similarly, perimeter warning signage, which is a consistent thing mentioned in some of the reference codes. Is that something that would be required or not? How frequent would that be required? And then evidence of compliance with the NRA guidelines would be required. Basically saying, we're telling you you need to meet the NRA recommendations. We are also telling you you need to explain how you meet them so that we don't have to go out of our way to find fault with what you're proposing. You need to show the evidence that you're meeting these codes. So if you feel like there are additional things in there that need to be added, that might be open-ended things, again, give me some feedback on that. That's what I have on slides for shooting range. That kind of covers the, again, rough draft of standards and code. Other thoughts, notes that you want to make on this one? on the shooting range part before we go on to the other land use?
Before we go on, I would like to offer the opportunity to anybody that's here tonight, if they've got any opinions or information that you'd like to add or anything that you've heard tonight, please come forward and add your opinions. And we won't even make you go back and affirm your oath either. This is just for this discussion.
My name is Todd Linville. I live at 4525 North 450 East, so I'm near this gun range. And about 15 years ago or so, my neighbor's house was hit by a stray bullet from a guy. He was on 350 East shooting, so I was a mile away. Went up over the woods, over my house, and hit the neighbor's house. Went through their wall and ended up in a pile of their kids' toys. And so that's why we're concerned about this, especially with this gun range and not having a berm on the east side. Concerned about what's going on back there. And they're shooting rifles back there also. So not just handguns, just they had carbines. At that meeting, they said they're shooting 5.56s and 7.62s. And some of those have ranges, thousands of yards. And so that's why we're concerned. And so I appreciate you guys looking at this stuff. And this, some people say, Thor is very passionate about this. I just wanted to also let you know that some neighbors are also passionate and concerned about this. And it's not just one person. There's we support what you're saying, that kind of thing. So I understand you guys are in a tough position here with, there's lots of different opinions. We don't want to step on people's toes too much, but you also want to be confident you can sit out in your backyard and not worry about stray bullets and stuff like that. So I think that's all I have for that. Thank you for comments. Anyone else, please? Nathan, before we move forward, I know you and I talked about an 8:30 deadline tonight going into this next topic. Is this something that we're going to be able to do justice to it, or are you looking at another hour and a half on this subject?
I think we can cover it in about 15 or 20 minutes. Might go slightly over 8:30, but I don't think we should go farther than that. Especially since this is not a topic that we've discussed terribly much before, so it's going to be more of a preview for everybody. So less expectation of feedback. So if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine.
So going then into the other discussion, this is staff generated recommendation of regulations for quote unquote farm restaurants. Let's see here. And this is originating from basically the Esterline Brewing, E-Brewing, Esterline Farm space near Calmer, where it's a farm restaurant and tasting room showcasing what they're doing, which is brewing beer, which is a farm product. They're processing farm product. They have a special exception for that. But the farm restaurant concept, which Mrs. Esterline has mentioned a few times, is something that's kind of shoehorned onto that approval. And I think based upon the discussions with the BZA and even a lot of the discussion that's been had here, it seems like something that would be a good idea for the county. But we need to establish, similar to shooting ranges, we need to establish some guidelines to say, this is our expectation. And so to that end, what I've outlined as the goal for this would be to permit food and drink establishments on farms that showcase those farm products, both local and regional, and establish regulations and guidelines for what that looks like. In doing the reference research, New York has a very statewide, has an agribusiness code that's very extensive. And when I did researching for farm restaurants, that was the most common location. Actually, that was the only location that called up farm restaurants. So I pulled one that was appeared to be very similar to what has been proposed here from the town of Clinton. And towns in New York are very similar to townships here. So when I use town, that's what it means.
So none other from Ohio, Illinois,
Not that I could find.
Kentucky?
What about like Keeners?
I'll get to that. That's a very good point. I'll get to that. So important to note as you look at this, there are a whole bunch of land uses that I've marked in here as basically placeholders for future, reserved for future use. The reason I did that was in case you want to broaden this out and start looking at agritourism or farm marketing events or farm stands and roadside stands and so on, we could. We have roadside stands that in the county that are allowed and they aren't problematic. So I don't think that regulation, I don't want to over-regulate. But if you have, I'm putting it in there just as a kind of a prompt for you to give some thought to. Maybe you think we do need to have something, or again, set the expectation of this is what a farm roadside stand looks like and not that. So if we wind up not using those at all in the final version, all of that would be just stripped out in the code and we'd focus on farm restaurant. So as this suggests in the rough draft is what I'm kind of calling this, farm restaurants and farm tasting rooms, which are essentially the same, you just have more food in one and more non-food or more liquid beverages in the other, would be special exceptions in the AG district. What I question is whether this would also be appropriate perhaps in the AGP district, because AGP is intended to be a district that promotes agriculture. And so perhaps this would be appropriate in AGP, even though AGP does have a very limited palette of uses already. This intent may actually line up very well with AGP. So if you've got thoughts on that, let me know. Going to the actual definition of what is a farm restaurant, it would be a restaurant effectively that would use agricultural products from either on that farm or from within Indiana or regionally if we want to define some sort of region, something like that. The intent is that you don't pull pineapples in or whatever and say, hey, this was grown on a farm, I'm using this. That might be allowed, but it would be in conjunction with other things that are locally produced. Then there would be a percentage, a share that would be required to be from on-site. And then an additional share that would be things like non-food products and other things, so souvenirs, t-shirts, and so on. And to Dane's point, local example, really good local example is Keener's Milk House. Keener's Dairy itself is not a farm restaurant, but Milk House would be, with your pizza and your ice cream and your milkshakes and your beer and wine, which are not produced there, but they're produced at Heritage Winery, and I forget where their beer comes from. Do you guys remember where their beer comes from? I don't remember. It's another local beer.
Are they AGP? I think they had to rezone that to commercial.
Yep.
To get that done.
Yeah.
So it's not an AG issue, it's a commercial.
Yeah. But in effect, what they are doing lines up very much with the way this is defined. So what this would do would be to say, instead of having to rezone to do what they're doing, it would be a special exception in the AG district. Is that, I mean, point blank, is that something that we want to do in Whitley County? If that's not what we want to do in Whitley County, I'll just stop and focus on shooting range.
But it seems like we're changing our code to appease one person who could essentially get everything done they need to by special exception through the BZA. That's how it's been explained to me.
I am not trying to appease one person. I am taking that concept that has been proposed and saying, and I'm asking you, is that concept something that we want to see elsewhere in the county?
What did, maybe I'm going sideways here, I'm not sure, but what did we rezone Eshelman's to? Wouldn't this fall underneath that?
Eshelman's is a planned unit development, and so that that code is kind of tailored to meet what their plans are as a wide area. It has commercial event, it has agricultural, it has commercial in terms of the event center, it has residential because they have some residential components in it. There's some conservation area in it, so it's a mixed use, kind of tailored to that area. That'd be another option, but on a very small scale, PUDs don't work very well. I think Brent.
I was wrong about the commercial for Keeners. They got through with a special use variance in Allen County.
Okay, thank you.
That's what they got.
I thought they were commercial. So thank you. Brent, I also want to point out as well, setting expectations, and that goes into what these proposed standards would be. That a farm restaurant must be in a building with an established capacity, and that's important because that established capacity is used later. Outdoor activities would be allowed, but they have to be very defined, and they can't just be some other outdoor activities. You can't just have a go-kart track and say, this is accessory to my farm restaurant. No, it needs to be related back to serving food and so on. So like an outdoor seating area would be accessory. Hours of operation would be restricted. Music would be allowed if it's in an incidental, not a music venue. And importantly, kind of going to where you're headed, large events would not be permitted unless explicitly permitted as part of the special exception. And large events would be anything in excess of the building capacity. And that is, again, setting the expectations per location and kind of going towards some of the complaints that have been brought up with Esther lines.
I guess I still don't understand why we need to get into all of this. If this wasn't on our long-term agenda or plan, I mean, as staff, you guys are pretty much swamped already. I don't understand why we need to open this can of worms. I mean, you're talking state regulations to contend with, the health departments involved in restaurants and all this stuff. It's not going to be a simple or easy process to go through all this.
I think because there were some complaints about some things that were going on. And so this would be a way to set standards and have some rules in place so that if this comes through again, there would be more control over what's going on.
Yeah. So basically, if we had someone else propose something similar somewhere else in the county, we can say, hey, this is our expectation. If we rezone to commercial, for example, we wouldn't have any of these standards. You could do a full-fledged restaurant in a rezoned commercial area. What this does is say, hey, in an ag area, if you are promoting agricultural products, again, promoting agriculture effectively, that's great. Here's our expectation for you to be able to do that with limitations. And here's our limitations. And the BZA can add further conditions and limitations.
So it'd still be a special exception with the BZA.
Right. It would be, as suggested, it's a special exception. But again, if the commission suggests that you don't want to mess with this, then no skin off my nose. We'll focus back on the other topics. So
my fear is if we don't start addressing it, then it could be another issue like a shooting range where it's something that's just not addressed.
Yeah.
And then we're playing cleanup later.
It would be, my feeling would be it's a use that in a different situation might be proposed and everybody feels like they want to approve it, but the code doesn't allow it. Very much like the shooting range situation. Everybody feels like it could be permissible, but, and the but is what we're here for. The final thought on that would be that development plan approval would be required if new buildings are constructed, and that just is in line with our current development plan statute, so, for code. It is 8:29 by my watch. Yes.
Okay, so this started with, from the BZA, from the Esterline. What was, I don't know the history of that. What happened there that they were coming to the BZA and they got turned down? Is that correct?
No. Well, yes, but no. The Esterline case, they came to the BZA for a special exception to quote unquote process agricultural product, which is their brewing operation. And accessory to that brewing operation, they had a retail component, a tasting room. The special exception gave a lot of conditions to what that retail component would be. The tasting room needs to be X number of square feet, hours of operation, and so on. The hours of operation of the actual brewing were left open-ended, but the tasting room was constrained. And so that's the approved special exception, essentially for brewing operation with that retail component. What they came in here recently with was a request to expand the hours of operation to be effectively every day from like 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. or something like that. That and some other factors the BZA felt was not appropriate at this point. And so that most recent amendment was turned down. They're still operating with the original. However, they seem to be they have exceeded what that original approval was. And so we're still dealing with trying to figure out how to bring them back into that original approval. This is not related to that enforcement action. This is saying, taking that concept and saying, if we want to encourage or allow for agricultural promotion elsewhere in the county, and somebody else has the same idea, what do we expect from them?
I think really what it hinges on, what we talked about on the BZA, is it's in a small space. And there's residential properties on both sides, and also to the south and that. And you have, as Danny has said, you have to be good neighbors. And it's causing ruffling feathers and that. So, you know.
And the property itself is, that's what?
Ag.
Ag.
Yeah. So there could be additional things about minimum property size, setbacks, and so on. This is definitely a rough draft, because I wanted to get your feedback. Again, as Brent said, is this something that we want to entertain? So.
And I will say this, and I believe this is right, isn't it, Jack? Danny said it's a good idea, but it's the wrong location.
Yeah.
Isn't that what he said? So I don't want to put words in his mouth. Danny's been at this a lot longer than a lot of us.
So at this point, if you would give me feedback, I think the committee might meet once or twice more once we get some feedback from the rest of the members, and I will have a updated draft for the subdivision meeting.
Nathan, thank you and your staff for the work, and Liz, as always, your legal input helps guide us and keeps us from doing anything really stupid. Appreciate that.
That's always my goal.
Or at least it encourages us not to do. With that being said, though, I do want to open up if anybody that's here would like to speak on this portion of what we've just discussed. Please come forward, share anything. I know you guys are just entertained tonight with it, and we appreciate you being here. And if there's something that you guys want to discuss and don't necessarily want to do that, do it in this forum, contact any one of us up here with your ideas, or even Nathan himself, and give us your ideas and your thoughts, and this is a process, it's a workshop. We're trying to work for the citizens of Whitley County. That's our goal here, is to put the best product forward for the great citizens of Whitley County. Let's make Whitley County great. Having nothing else on the agenda, we're adjourned. I listen.